At 76, Ric Flair is proving he's still full of surprises. For years, fans have wondered, what does the Nature Boy really think about Vince McMahon? And after years of rumors and guessing, the wrestling star just said something that nobody saw coming. But here's the twist. What he says isn't at all what fans thought it would be. Is this a shocking secret or a sweet tribute? And why did it take him this long to finally tell the truth? Let's find out. When being loyal costs everything. The year was 1991, and Ric Flair was at the top of his game as WCW World Champion. But behind the scenes, a big fight was happening that had nothing to do with wrestling stories. WCW boss Jim Herd was making Flair's life awful, telling him to cut his hair, wear an earring, and become a gladiator character. The breaking point came over something that seemed small, but was really personal. $25,000. In the old NWA system, every world champion had to put up $25,000 as a promise that they wouldn't leave with the belt. Flair had paid this money years earlier, trusting that it would be given back when he lost the title. It was normal practice, a promise between gentlemen that had worked for years. But when Flair asked for his money back during contract talks, Herd said no in a mean and disrespectful way that shocked the Nature Boy. Flair was stunned. After carrying WCW on his back for years after being the company's top star and most reliable performer, this was how they treated him. The insult hurt deeper than any physical hit he'd ever taken in the ring. Flair fired back boldly, making it clear that he wouldn't be pushed around, and hinted that the championship belt would soon be somewhere unexpected. Flair immediately picked up the phone and made a call that would send shockwaves through the wrestling world. On the other end of the line was Vince McMahon, the man who had been trying to get Flair to join WWE for years. "I called Vince and I said I'll come as the champion if you want me to be," Flair later said. "I sent the belt to WWE, and Bobby Heenan took it out on TV the next week." When WWE programming aired that Monday night, fans couldn't believe their eyes. There was Bobby, the Brain Heenan, holding the WCW World Championship belt like a baby, announcing that the real world's champion was coming to WWE. It was one of the most shocking moments in wrestling history. The Nature Boy had done the unthinkable. He'd taken his rival company's most important championship and handed it directly to their biggest competitor. WCW was in complete chaos. They'd lost their biggest star and their championship belt in one terrible blow. All over $25,000 that they refused to return to the man who had made them millions. Flair's decision wasn't just about money, it was about respect. He'd been loyal to WCW for years, and they'd paid back that loyalty with embarrassment and broken promises. But Vince McMahon was about to show him what real respect looked like when McMahon made his move. When Ric Flair arrived at WWE headquarters in 1991, carrying the WCW World Championship belt like a war trophy, Vince McMahon could have taken advantage of a desperate man. Flair was so eager to escape WCW's toxic environment that he was willing to accept almost any offer. Instead, McMahon did something that would define their relationship for years to come. You know what Vince said? He said, "I'm not going to give you a guarantee. I'll shake your hand to make you more money." Flair remembered years later, that handshake represented everything that Flair had been missing at WCW. No complicated contracts, no lawyers, no corporate red tape. It's just two men looking each other in the eye and making a promise based on respect for each other. McMahon immediately began planning how to make Flair's impact as big as possible. The original idea was a dream match between Flair and Hulk Hogan at WrestleMania 8. A fight between the biggest stars of WWE and WCW that would have drawn huge pay-per-view numbers. When that plan fell through due to backstage politics, McMahon didn't demote Flair or punish him for things he couldn't control. Instead, he created an even bigger opportunity, the 1992 Royal Rumble for the vacant WWE Championship. Flair entered that Royal Rumble as the third participant and lasted over an hour, eliminating multiple opponents and capturing his first WWE Championship in stunning fashion. McMahon had kept his word about making Flair more money, and he'd done it in spectacular style. The respect was clear in every interaction. When Flair needed time off for personal problems, McMahon let him have it. When creative decisions needed to be made, McMahon talked with Flair rather than ordering him around. It was a partnership built on helping each other and genuine appreciation. Even when things went wrong, McMahon handled them professionally. During a 1992 title match between Flair and Randy Savage, McMahon became frustrated with too much interference and actually stopped the match halfway through, calling both wrestlers backstage. He didn't like all the interference. It was 2 against 1. He was furious about it, Flair remembered. But instead of blaming Flair for the chaos, McMahon worked with him to fix the situation and continue the match. That level of hands-on involvement could have felt like being controlled too much. But Flair appreciated McMahon's passion for the product. Here was a boss who cared enough to personally make sure that every match lived up to his standards. The handshake deal had grown into something much deeper. A working relationship based on trust, respect, and shared commitment to being great. McMahon had shown Flair what it felt like to be valued, and Flair would never forget that treatment. But their business relationship was about to face its first major test, the loyalty test. By 1993, Ric Flair found himself in an impossible position. WWE was preparing to move him down the card, changing him from main event status to a more supporting role. At the same time, WCW's new management was offering him big money to come back home. The decision would test everything he'd learned about Vince McMahon's character. Flair had a spoken agreement with McMahon that gave him an escape option. If WWE wasn't going to use him in a main event position, and he received a better offer somewhere else, he would be released from his contract. It was the kind of gentleman's agreement that could easily be ignored or forgotten when convenient. McMahon honored it completely. I chose to leave WWF when I was going to be moved to a mid-card position, and Bill Watts offered to come back to WCW, Flair explained. There were no legal battles, no attempts to keep him against his will, no punishment for wanting to leave. Instead, McMahon allowed Flair to fulfill his remaining house show commitments and even participate in WWE's European tours before leaving. Could have stripped Flair of upcoming dates or made his exit difficult, but he chose professionalism. Over petty revenge, his graceful departure said everything about McMahon's character that Flair needed to know. Even when losing a valuable asset, McMahon treated people with dignity and kept his word. It was a lesson that would stay with Flair for years. During his second WCW run, Flair often thought about the difference between the two companies. WCW had more money and offered him creative control, but the respect and professionalism weren't the same. McMahon's handshake still meant more than any written contract. The wrestling landscape was changing rapidly, with Monday Night Raw competing directly against WCW Monday Nitro in what became known as the Monday Night Wars. Both companies were throwing huge contracts at talent and trying to steal each other's biggest stars. Through it all, Flair kept a friendly relationship with McMahon. There were no public insults or bitter comments from either side. Even as competitors, they respected each other's business decisions and maintained their personal friendship. When WCW began struggling creatively in the late 1990s, Flair sometimes wondered what might have been different if he'd stayed with McMahon. The grass wasn't always greener on the other side, and WWE's consistent quality made WCW's problems more obvious, but Flair's biggest test of loyalty was still ahead. When McMahon bought WCW in 2001, suddenly they were no longer competitors. The question was whether their relationship could survive the change from business partners to employee and boss once again. McMahon's response would prove that some relationships go beyond business deals. The shocking return. When Vince McMahon bought WCW in March 2001, he got the largest wrestling library in history, dozens of talented performers, and the rights to use legendary characters and storylines. But there was one prize that meant more to him than all the others combined: the chance to bring Ric Flair back home. The Nature Boy's return to WWE in November 2001 wasn't just another talent signing. McMahon created a storyline that recognized Flair's legendary status while creating real excitement about his comeback. The reveal was perfect. After months of guessing about mystery ownership percentages, Flair came out as the owner of WWE, having bought Shane and Stephanie McMahon's stock during the WCW Invasion angle. Suddenly, the Nature Boy was Vince McMahon's equal partner. This wasn't some mid-card return or nostalgic cameo. McMahon positioned Flair as a main event player immediately, giving him storylines with The Undertaker, Triple H, and eventually McMahon himself. At 52 years old, Flair was being treated like the legend he was. The on-screen rivalry between Flair and McMahon became intensely personal, ending in their street fight at the 2002 Royal Rumble. But behind the scenes, their relationship remained respectful and professional. They were two performers creating compelling television, not two enemies settling real scores. McMahon trusted Flair with major storylines throughout the 2000s. The Conor angle, the brand split where Flair controlled Raw while McMahon controlled SmackDown. The evolution of Flair's character all showed McMahon's confidence in his abilities. Even during Flair's darkest personal moments, McMahon stood by him. When money problems became public knowledge, McMahon never used that weakness for cheaper contracts. When family tragedies struck, McMahon provided support without expecting anything in return. "Everything Vince McMahon has ever said to me my entire life has come true," Flair said years later. He said, "I'm going to put you back on," and he did. McMahon had restored Flair's confidence, given him purpose, and reminded him why he'd fallen in love with professional wrestling in the first place. The partnership worked because both men understood their roles. McMahon provided the platform and creative direction, while Flair delivered the performances and star power. Neither man tried to overshadow the other or take credit for shared successes. At 76, Ric Flair finally sets the record straight on Vince McMahon. "It's not what we expected." Their relationship wasn't built on convenience or necessity. It was built on years of mutual respect and genuine appreciation for each other's talents. But McMahon's greatest gesture of respect was still to come during one of the most emotional nights in wrestling history. When McMahon stepped aside, March 31, 2008, marked the end of an era. After nearly 4 decades in professional wrestling, Ric Flair was delivering his goodbye speech on Monday Night Raw following his retirement match against Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 24. The entire wrestling world came out to honor the Nature Boy that night. Triple H organized a procession of current and former superstars to pay their respects. Shawn Michaels, members of the Four Horsemen, Ricky Steamboat, Harley Race, Chris Jericho, and The Undertaker all broke character to thank Flair for his contributions to the industry. Then, as the emotional ceremony reached its peak, one final figure came out from the backstage area. Vince McMahon walked slowly to the ring, his presence demanding immediate respect from everyone present. What happened next revealed everything about their relationship. McMahon simply stood in the background, allowing Flair to enjoy the love of his peers and the fans. The most powerful man in wrestling chose to be a supporting player in someone else's moment. That gesture spoke louder than any words could have. McMahon understood that this night belonged to Flair, and his role was to add importance to the proceedings without overshadowing the guest of honor. The visual was striking. Good guys and bad guys standing together, breaking character to honor a legend. It was one of the rarest moments in WWE history when the fake barriers of sports entertainment disappeared and genuine emotion took center stage. McMahon had put together similar goodbye ceremonies for other legends, but none carried the same emotional weight as Flair's send-off. The respect between these two men was clear in every detail, from the careful planning to the perfect execution. Later that year, when Flair briefly came out of retirement to confront Chris Jericho, McMahon supported his decision without questioning his judgment. Even in retirement, Flair's instincts about what was best for business remained sharp. The ceremony represented the peak of their professional relationship, but it wasn't the end of their personal friendship. McMahon continued checking on Flair. During his TNA years, offering advice and support even when Flair was working for a rival company. "I need to make this public," Flair would later say about his feelings toward McMahon. The emotion behind those words reflected years of gratitude for treatment that went far beyond normal business relationships. McMahon had given Flair more than money or championships. He'd given him dignity, respect, and a platform to showcase his talents during every stage of his career. That kind of loyalty was rare in any industry, but especially in professional wrestling. As controversies began swirling around McMahon in recent years, many wrestling figures distanced themselves or stayed diplomatically silent. But Flair's response would prove that some bonds go beyond temporary scandals, the test of true friendship. By 2022, Vince McMahon's world was falling apart. Sexual misconduct allegations, hush money payments, and internal investigations dominated wrestling headlines. The Wall Street Journal published damaging reports, and WWE's board of directors launched a formal inquiry into his behavior. The wrestling industry watched nervously as sponsors fled and stock prices fell. Former employees began sharing stories about toxic workplace conditions. And media figures who had once praised McMahon's achievements suddenly focused only on his alleged failures. For most wrestling legends, this was the perfect time to distance themselves from McMahon. Speaking positively about him could damage their own reputations and career prospects. The politically safe move was to stay silent or offer carefully worded statements that avoided taking sides. McMahon retired from WWE in July 2022, ending a 50-year career that had transformed professional wrestling into a global entertainment empire. Even his return as executive chairman in January 2023 to oversee the company's sale only made the controversy worse. Current WWE wrestlers couldn't speak freely without risking their jobs. Former employees often had legitimate complaints that colored their perspectives. Industry journalists felt free to publish critical stories they'd previously held back. But Ric Flair had a unique position in this landscape. At 76, with his legacy secure and no need for future WWE employment, he could speak honestly without worrying about professional consequences. When the topic came up during interviews, most wrestling figures avoided it or changed the subject. They understood that any statement about McMahon could be misunderstood or taken out of context, potentially damaging their own reputations. Flair took the opposite approach entirely. Instead of staying diplomatically silent or offering lukewarm support, he doubled down on his loyalty in the most public way possible. During his appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience, one of the world's biggest podcasts, Flair knew that every word would be analyzed and debated. He could have easily avoided the topic or given some generic response about separating personal relationships from professional concerns. Instead, he chose to defend McMahon with the same passion that had made him wrestling's greatest talker. The decision required genuine conviction. Flair had nothing to gain professionally from defending McMahon during peak controversy. If anything, it could have damaged his own reputation among fans who viewed McMahon negatively. Yet Flair seemed completely unconcerned about potential backlash. His delivery was confident and unapologetic, delivered with the same intensity he'd once brought to his legendary wrestling promos. The statement challenged the popular story that McMahon was universally difficult to work with or disrespectful to talent. While some former employees had negative experiences, Flair's testimony provided a different perspective from someone who had worked extensively with McMahon across multiple decades. His words would soon shock the wrestling world and reveal the true depth of their relationship. The shocking declaration. April 2023, the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. Millions of listeners worldwide. When the conversation turned to Vince McMahon's controversies, Ric Flair had a choice: play it safe or speak from the heart. He chose his heart. "He's my hero," Flair said without hesitation. Those 3 words cut through months of guessing about how wrestling legends viewed McMahon while others whispered privately or stayed diplomatically silent. Flair made his position crystal clear, but he wasn't finished. "I judge people by how they treat me, and he has treated me like I've never had anyone treat me with more respect ever in this business. He's a great guy. I don't care what he does. He's my hero." The impact was immediate and undeniable. Social media exploded with reactions, and wrestling news sites scrambled to analyze every word. Here was wrestling's most outspoken legend offering unwavering support for the industry's most controversial figure. Flair wasn't dismissing the allegations or making light of serious accusations. He was speaking specifically about his personal relationship with McMahon and the treatment he'd received over 4 decades. Wrestling observers noted that Flair's comments carried special weight because of his own controversial past. The nature boy had faced his share of criticism and scandal throughout his career, giving him perspective about judging people during their lowest moments. Despite decades in a business known for politics and betrayal, Flair maintained clear principles about supporting people who had treated him well His words also highlighted the complexity of human relationships. People can have positive personal experiences with individuals who face serious allegations from others. Flair wasn't dismissing other people's experiences. He was speaking specifically about his own interactions with McMahon. The timing made his declaration even more significant. Speaking positively about McMahon during peak controversy required genuine conviction. Flair had nothing to gain and potentially much to lose by defending him so boldly, yet his delivery was confident and authentic, reflecting the same honesty that had made him wrestling's most compelling personality for decades. He wasn't asking for permission or approval. He was simply stating his truth. The reaction was swift and divided. Supporters praised his loyalty and authenticity, while critics questioned his judgment and timing. The wrestling community found itself divided about separating personal relationships from public allegations. But for Flair, the decision was simple. McMahon had earned his loyalty through consistent respect and fair treatment over decades. No amount of public pressure or social media criticism would change that fundamental truth. His shocking declaration had reminded everyone that real relationships are more complex than headline controversies suggest. Why this moment matters. Ric Flair's defense of Vince McMahon represents more than just one legend supporting another during controversy. It reveals fundamental truths about loyalty, character, and the complexity of human relationships that extend far beyond professional wrestling. At 76, Flair had the ultimate freedom. He could speak his truth without worrying about career consequences or social media backlash. His legacy was secure, his financial future stable, and his reputation established. When he called McMahon his hero, those words carried the weight of complete honesty. The statement challenged simple stories about McMahon's character and business relationships. While serious allegations deserve attention and investigation, Flair's testimony provided important context about McMahon's treatment of veteran talent throughout his career. Their relationship shows how consistent respect and fair dealing create loyalty that survives public controversy and industry pressure. McMahon's treatment of Flair during both successful and difficult periods built trust that went beyond temporary scandals. For the wrestling industry, Flair's example showed that meaningful relationships shouldn't be abandoned during difficult times, especially when based on decades of positive interactions and mutual respect. Fair-weather friends are common in entertainment. True loyalty is rare and valuable. The moment also revealed something important about Flair's character and worldview. His willingness to speak boldly when others stayed silent reflected the same courage that had made him wrestling's most compelling personality for 5 decades. Wrestling fans gained insight into a side of McMahon that wasn't visible through television programming or corporate decisions. While fans knew the on-screen Mr. McMahon character, Flair experienced the private individual who had treated him with consistent respect and professionalism. The controversy surrounding Flair's comments showed how difficult it is to navigate complex moral situations in the modern media environment. Social media and 24-hour news cycles demand immediate reactions and clear positions, but real relationships are often more nuanced than public statements can capture. Looking forward, Flair's loyalty will likely be remembered as one of the defining moments of McMahon's controversial period. While others distanced themselves or stayed silent, wrestling's most authentic voice spoke clearly about his personal experiences and relationship. The legacy extends beyond just Flair and McMahon to broader questions about friendship, loyalty, and moral complexity in professional relationships. Wrestling provided the stage, but the themes resonate universally. Ultimately, Flair's defense revealed character traits that defined both men throughout their careers: authenticity, loyalty, and the courage to speak truthfully regardless of consequences. These qualities helped make them wrestling legends, and they continued to shape their actions even during the most controversial moments of their lives. What do you think about Flair's shocking loyalty to McMahon despite all the controversy? Drop your thoughts below and subscribe for more Wrestling Insider Revelation.